We'll get started in just a moment, chat. Thanks for tuning in. right, all right. Cut the music, Jimbo, in the back. All right, thank you, Jim. Hide the video. What's going on here? Oh boy. I clicked hide the video. There it is. Hey, welcome. Happy Wednesday, wherever you are in the world. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I'm Brian Clark. I'm a Snyk. I'm a developer advocate here at Snyk. I'm not a Snyk, but I'm a developer advocate at Snyk. And I'm going to be taking you through today's session. Stranger danger, your JavaScript attack surface just got bigger. And by your, I mean mine too, okay? Because I'm a JavaScript developer, and this stuff is good to know. It's really important to know, and I think you'll find it helpful and insightful and informative, and insert other learning adjective here. Anyway, welcome in. Happy to have you here. How are you all doing? I see some friendly folks in the chat already. Thank you for being here and jumping into the stream early at the beginning like this. To give you a heads up of what we're going to be doing today, it's a little bit of presentation, but like this can be as interactive as you want it to be. So feel free to interrupt me, send your messages, your questions in the chat. If you want me to go down a different rabbit hole than what's planned for today, that's the point of these live streams. So while it is a bit of a presentation, we can stray from the plans of that presentation, the agenda, and go into whatever it is that you find most interesting that you want to know more about, and I'll do my best to help out there. Time for the intro dance? No, Surly Dev. You're definitely in the wrong stream, but thank you for all the references to my own stream there. I see some friendly folks in the chat already and thinks Surly Dev. Yes, of course. Of course. It's good to see familiar names in the chat, you know? It makes me feel, I don't know, good. I like to see it. And I like to see new names too. So it's all good all around. How are you all doing? What's happening? A fit nerd. How are you feeling, buddy? It's good to see you as well. Welcome in. I feel pressure now. Now I feel the pressure on me because Randall was in here. Now you're in here, Micah. Oh, goodness. What a way to start the stream. No, it's good to see you both. All right. So I'm going to jump right into I'm operating on 8-cylinder. Ooh, okay. That's good. We're going to jump into the presentation. Let me know how this looks, all right? Because I'm doing this a different way in the StreamYard situation. Something I've been doing when I do the live streams is I just do my camera and full screen. But I've had some folks every now and then report like the resolution being a little bit odd or not really working out for them. So let me know about that. In fact, let me turn off the name thing down there because we don't need to see my name anymore. All right. Everything looking okay? 8 cylinders of a 12-cylinder engine. Okay, I wasn't sure if it was like, you're a 6-cylinder and somehow you added an extra 2 to your engine there, fit nerd, or if you were 12. But that's okay, good. All right. It's really Dev, you're worried about your attack surface now? Well, don't worry. Once you come out of this session, you'll feel a little bit better about it. You'll know how to manage it better. Let's put it that way. All right. So stranger danger. Just like we were taught when we were kids, we need to keep away from these dangerous stranger things. And I don't know, I'm going to digress from there. But in any case, hi. If you don't know me, I'm Brian Clark, I'm a developer advocate here at Snyk. And you can find me on Twitter and all that fun stuff. But this isn't about me. What I want this to be about is your code and the security of it. So I want you to start thinking about something. I'm going to ask some questions that you don't necessarily have to answer. Danger, Will Robinson, yes, Surly Dev. But you can if you'd like. But I just want you to start thinking about this stuff. So you think about open source and what the future of that looks like, and then start thinking about, okay, what does security look like as we get towards the future of what open source might look like to you, open source software. And with that in mind, some things that I would say is, or I would predict for the future of open source is it's just only going to get bigger and more expansive, which means there's going to be more code out there, which means there's going to be more potential vulnerabilities from a security perspective that we need to be on top of, let alone the existing libraries and software that's out there already that can have new vulnerabilities that are discovered over time within them, or as new versions of those come out, there might be new vulnerabilities in them as well. Right. So as time progresses, more code grows, so does the risk of having security vulnerabilities in that code. So back in my day, early days starting as a developer, I didn't really think too much about code. I was very heavily focused on my own code, my objectives, and the way I was graded on my performance. And my performance reviews was what was I delivering, feature wise, value wise, to our customers, to our business, to our users, all that. That's how I was kind of judged and graded on at a company for my role as a developer. And oftentimes when I would get approached, or I imagine any in a lot of cases for folks, whether even early days of your career or even if you're a seasoned developer, that tends to be your main focus is iterating on that, building out the feature set of your applications, your projects, starting new projects, and that's like your main goals, right? But when somebody approaches you and says, "Hey, have you thought about the security of the application?" My initial thought was, "Well, kinda, yeah, like that's important to me." But I have this kinda, like, focus on my code, right? My code is this code here, let's say this was the code I wrote. Is this code secure? Are there any security issues within it? Those lines of code that I created, which is important, right? I'm not minimizing the importance of that, but that tends to be the main thing that comes to the forefront of your mind when the topic of security comes into play, right? Imagine many of you watching this either live or the recording of this later on in a similar situation. But what I've since learned beyond that is that there's more, going with the imagery of that iceberg, there's more beyond the surface of it. Below the surface, there are different layers of security that I wasn't always thinking about, and maybe you weren't always thinking about. And this creates that extra surface area, tying back into the title of the session that describes that ever-growing space that could be creating more vulnerabilities or providing more potential vulnerabilities in your code. In a study done by Snyk, talking about the open source code that we rely upon, it found that 80 to 90% of code base that's running in production is actually open source. So if you think about it, majority of your code, more than majority of your code, like almost all of your code based on this study that's running in production is relying on lines of code that is actually something you have not written for your application. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's very eye-opening in my mind, especially when I first saw this, that I didn't really think about that because again, I was very heavily focused. I had my blinders on of like, I'm working on my code. That's what I'm responsible for. But the reality is I'm responsible for more than that as a developer because I'm introducing these open source dependencies that is both a good thing. It's a blessing and kind of a curse a little bit because that's code that I don't have control of, but it's also benefiting me because it's allowing me to not have to rewrite that same type of functionality, right? That open source library, let's say my go-to example is doing like date time math. So having something like moment.js or date FNS in JavaScript world, those are packages that help doing date displaying and calculations and stuff like that. I don't wanna have to handwrite that myself. Time zone math and calculations is one of the more difficult more annoying things to deal with as a developer in any application. So why not go with something that's already been tried and true to help you out with that, right? And, so yeah, that's good, but that's kinda bad, or it could be potentially bad because what is that code introducing into my actual project here? And that could have vulnerabilities in itself, right? And I need to know whether there's vulnerabilities in that, and then be able to make decisions based upon that and see how I go about fixing that. But in addition to that, right, that's just me choosing my direct dependencies. That same study found that 80% of the vulnerabilities were transitive dependencies, or you think of it as like child dependencies of your direct dependencies and all the way down that chain as well, because that child dependency could have its own child dependencies. And what about any vulnerabilities that are found and disclosed within those? How do we manage that? And you can imagine this just starts exploding into a huge tree, especially in Node.js and JavaScript ecosystem, a huge tree of potential vulnerabilities and lines of code to try and manage and keep track of. Think about doing that manually. That doesn't sound like a lot of fun, but maybe by the end of this, well, definitely by the end of this, you'll know of something that will help you with that. And you probably already know the answer to that. I'm going to skip that for now. So, more visually speaking here, more visuals to drive this message home rather. Uh, in this case, we're pulling in a library called Marked. The example demo app that we're going to walk through is going to use this and demonstrate it even further. But this Marked is providing some functionality in my code. But that's my lines of code that I'm using to have within my application. Beyond that, though, are all these other npm packages too, including Marked, that's helping consist and support, not helping consist, it's helping support my code and provide the functionality I need to my app. So referring throughout this presentation, referring back to this study is going to be a common thing, but you can see that the trend, going back to our earlier question of where do you see open source software going in the future and the security of that? Well, one, it's going to continue to grow. In some ecosystems, it doesn't necessarily seem that way. Looking forward to seeing an updated study on the same aspect that has the more recent years included in it to see where things have trended since this study was uh, executed. But you can see, especially in npm at least, the packages have grown over time, and I imagine it's going to continue to happen until maybe there comes a point. I imagine I'm just gonna go off on a little tangent here, but there's gonna become a point where I think we've had enough. Maybe I don't know. We have a package for like everything. It's almost like that meme or joke. Like there's an app for that. Well, in npm and Node world, there's a package for that when you think of ideas and stuff. All right. So with that in mind, as time goes on, there's more packages, more open source software, more lines of code. As you can imagine, more vulnerabilities that are found and disclosed each year by ecosystem has grown over time. Some a little bit more exponentially than others, but you can see it's still kind of linearly at least growing in a lot of those different ecosystems that are out there. So what we're talking about here is open source supply chain security. An example of this to kind of help again convey the message that we're trying to describe here is that it's not always in your direct dependency. So in this particular instance that happened back in well, it started in 2011 when this package event stream was created, but you can see the timeline of events of how things occurred and what was the disclosure time frame and so forth. But you can see that maybe you were directly depending upon event stream, but its child dependency flat map was something that had a vulnerability that was disclosed in it and affected and affect it a it affected words many libraries that were depending. It was a popular library that's or is a popular library that was dependent upon across the ecosystem. So this leads me into something that I could do a whole talk on in itself. In fact, I kind of have a little bit here and there. I've made videos on it that you can see on this channel on YouTube if you're watching on there right now. And it's about helping you pick open source libraries, open source packages. And I feel like a broken record saying this. So if you heard me say this before, I apologize. But I really like it hits home for me in that I wish I had this tool, Snyk Advisor, many years ago because it would have saved me a lot of time. It would have saved me and my company a lot of time and money. Um, what so that I didn't have to do so much of this manual work. But when it comes to picking open source packages, there's a lot involved with that. Right? There's a lot of things to be thinking about to make sure that you're not introducing vulnerabilities on the onset of pulling it into your project right away, let alone later on, right? We'll talk about later on after you've already pulled it into your project. But before you even pull it into your project, you got to find a package that does what you need. So again, that example in this image that you see here is Moment. But let me see. There's a comment in chat. Why is this not showing up though? Pause here for a moment. Don't know why, but it's getting cut off in the chat here, but I can't quite see it. In any case, keep any comments or questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. It's not a bother or anything like that. Don't feel like you have to wait for me to finish talking to ask any questions like that. All right, so Moment, I'm looking for something to help me out with date, time math, and manipulation and displaying dates in certain formats. Moment is one of those libraries that I might be exploring, and it fulfills that need, right? So right off the bat, that's good, but there's some other criteria that we need to take into consideration when evaluating libraries. Is it pretty popular? Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be popular, but it's something to help gauge and, like, take into consideration. Is it maintained pretty well, which is a bit more important, I think, in the sense of, like, how often are there commits being made to it? How often are issues being responded to? How often are PRs opened and closed, and so forth? How many people are helping maintain it? Is it just one individual, or is it maybe a team of people that are potentially supporting this package? These are just kind of the tip of the no pun intended, I guess, continuing with that metaphor, but tip of the iceberg. We're just scratching the surface here. But the nice thing is Snyk Advisor, which you know what, let's switch gears a little bit. I'm gonna go off track a bit. Uh a fit nerd in chat really quick. Let's talk. It says date time math is the real danger, Will Robinson. Yeah. Let's go take a look at let's branch off from the presentation a little bit here. Whoops. Get out of there. And we're gonna go to advisor. And let's actually step through doing this really quick. So the screenshot is great, but I want you to see the full results that you would get here. So I search for moment. So I might go and Google first, like to try and find packages that fulfill the needs that I want. So I might Google like date time math library, Node.js or JavaScript, and then it'll come up with some results. So I might use that to discover some of the packages, but then my next step would be come right over to Snyk Advisor, snyk.io/advisor. I'm going to drop that in the chat for people to see as well. So you can have a direct link so you don't have to type it in yourself. And then I would search for it. So I search for moment, I click on the first result here. And what's nice about this is it gives me a health score in this bird's eye view of it right off the bat, so that I can get a gauge on whether or not, in fact, it's not quite showing up a little bit differently here. I think some UI changes happened since that screenshot too. But I get a health score, right? And it gives me, it's out of 100, and obviously the higher the better, or maybe not obviously, but now you know the higher the score, the better, because then it means a little bit more healthy or of a package to be introducing into your project. And some of the criteria that they're evaluating packages on in here is the security of it, the popularity of it, the maintenance, and the community of it, right? And in here, it's indicating that, or right above me here, that it is an active community. The maintenance of it seems healthy. It's a key ecosystem project, meaning it's used by a lot of projects out there. And currently, at least in the latest version, there are no known security issues. So right here, this tells me like, okay, I feel more confident now as a developer, or maybe you're an architect at a company and you're responsible for choosing and signing off on what open source libraries teams within development teams within your company are got the green light to kind of start using for their purposes. Maybe they reached out to you saying, "Hey, we need you to help us out with picking one." And this is going to help you make that decision. You're going to feel more confident in saying, "Yes, this is what we agree should be a package to use for this purpose because of this criteria." Again, in the past, I've done this and I've had to do it manually, and it was quite time consuming and costly, right? If you think about the cost of the time in doing this. What's nice as well is they show some, let's say maybe that's not good enough. I don't know why that would necessarily be the case, but maybe it's not good enough, that score that you got there. You can also find similar packages that are shown here. So there's day.js, there's international relative time format from format.js not company, but like workspace or organization in npm, and you can start exploring, and that one has a 98. See that 98 score out of 100. That's really good, actually. Let's check that out really quick. um so maybe you can start evaluating some of these against each other and compare them a bit better using this criteria. Diving into the criteria a little bit more, I think the security one is pretty straightforward. You can see all the the popular versions are highlighted. So this one, in this case, 4, 5, 16 is popular. You can see all the versions that are at least publicly released by that package and whether there are known vulnerabilities within that package. Also, some license risks that are potentially there in terms of like what type of license is it restrictive. Maybe you can't necessarily use it for your purposes if your package or your project is um, for commercial purposes and so forth, whether or not there's a security policy, but that gives you that idea of security and how it's evaluating based on that. Popularity is giving you data based on weekly downloads, which that's quite a bit. Look at that influential project. How many forks are there, GitHub stars, and so forth. Maintenance wise, you can see the commit. I mean, look at this. You just gather and get a really good sense of how healthy a package is with all of this data all in one place. In the past, you would have to do that manually, or if you didn't know about this tool, Snyk Advisor, free tool, just go to the website and you'll see. You can plug in and start browsing around all the different packages that you're searching for and see how they measure up. So I can see all the commits that are out there for it, and then understand the community aspect of it? Is there a README? Is there some type of documentation, right? That's what like having a README helps indicate there in that regard. A contributing document, how many contributors there are, the code of conduct and funding, so forth. And that's all that fun stuff for you. So, Snyk Advisor, check it out. I went off a little bit of the usual track there to dive into this a bit. And it's not just for NPM, by the way. Although today's session is about JavaScript and Node.js, right now, Snyk Advisor, it's in beta, but it supports NPM, PyPI, Go, and Docker. So you can start searching for different packages and in Docker cases, base images that you might be relying upon for your projects and see how they measure up. Cool. All right, back to the presentation. Where were we? We were somewhere in here. And hey, Frackbar, good to see you, buddy. Welcome in. All right, so continuing on, that study as well talks about and basically broke it out. Can I switch sides here? No, I don't have that set up right now with this button. Shoot. Un momento, por favor. That should do it. There we go. So I'm out of the way. So this same study over here, that one, measured how many vulnerabilities were disclosed that were or found in direct dependencies and indirect dependencies based on programming language and ecosystem. So here you can see like PyPI, it's more about direct dependencies that had vulnerabilities, whereas like Ruby and NPM was more indirect. I like to call out here, I've had the question come up in the past, and I think it's a good thing to mention. Some of that is probably due to or a contributing factor is um, the way the culture is around a potential programming language and ecosystem and how that programming language and ecosystem operates, right? So Python or PHP I believe, have like a standard library that's built into it already that you don't necessarily have a ton of extra open source libraries to be depending upon because much of what you would need is built into the language itself, maybe, right? Whereas like with NPM, and this is where I think it's more cultural, NPM and JavaScript, the idea is everything is single, not everything, but you try to get to as single responsibility, modularize all kinds of functionalities. And that maybe has gotten, and I say maybe, in my opinion, I think a little bit, can be a bit overkill because we see packages like one example is left pad, which would literally it would add some padding to the left-hand side of a string type of thing. It's like, do we necessarily need a package that does that? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know that I mean, I personally don't feel like I need that. I can write that code myself. But maybe some people do, and maybe they have a good reason for that. And apparently, in that case, that example of left pad, there was a lot of good reason because that was a very widely used package, and there was quite an incident, not a security incident necessarily, but an incident that happened where that package was pulled off of the registry and caused a lot of things to start breaking as a result of that. So, just an example, and if you haven't heard that story or that incident that happened, I encourage you to look it up because it's quite a learning opportunity too that provided for people. Even though it wasn't necessarily fun being in the middle of it, it's a definitely something to learn from, and I think we have learned from at least a little bit in our JavaScript world. All right, next. So, how are you going to be able to manage all of this, right? As I was talking about before, being able to manually monitor all of your direct dependencies and then their child dependencies and then their child dependencies and etc. How are you going to do that? You're gonna need some type of automation. You're gonna need a tool to do that, and that's where Snyk is one of those tools, or it provides a tool, or a suite of products actually, that can help you in managing all this, and that is Snyk open source. So this example here, the Snyk app itself is alerting you to this is directly built into one of the GitHub integrations that are there, but if you don't use GitHub, but you use some other source control management system like GitLab, there's integrations for that as well. Snyk will provide capabilities to you to alert you of vulnerabilities that are found in your dependencies or anywhere in your dependency tree and give you information on what that vulnerability is and why it's it's an issue, potentially an issue for you, and what are the remediation options that you have. How can you fix this security issue found through your dependencies? And this example here, the screenshot is where Snyk can even go so far as to open up PRs for you to help you out and making that even more streamlined and simplified. So you're not doing this even doing the upgrades to, let's say, patch versions of that dependency that you have. You don't have to do that manually yourself. There's a PR that you just kind of review, test things out, and then merge it once you feel things are good to go. All right. So by now, hopefully you are feeling that that attack surface has gotten bigger and you've come to the realization that through open source, while it's a blessing to have those capabilities and not have to rewrite that same code, it also could potentially be a curse because of the vulnerabilities that are found in it, potentially found in it. All right. So that's just one layer below that iceberg, right? And maybe you did your due diligence. Maybe you were able to, and props to you if you're able to do this because it can be quite difficult at times, but you managed to get all of your dependencies patched, updated, fixed, or maybe you removed and swapped out for something else. Whatever your mechanism was or your approach to solving the security issues that were disclosed to you through Snyk, you managed to get down to 0 across the board. First of all, congrats on that. Like, that's pretty amazing. It's quite the feat. But unfortunately, you're not quite done there yet. There's more, right? There's always potentially more. Maybe you're also using containers to support your development practices and your deployments and being able to reproduce the environments that you're relying upon and keeping consistency in the environments that you're running upon. You're using containers, right? And this is where we get into the next layer below the iceberg here. And that is you gotta worry about containers, functions as a service, maybe static site hosts, all this stuff that's like environmental that you might be using and relying upon to, again, create that consistency in the environment that you're developing on. So it's easy to reproduce errors, issues, behaviors that you're finding within your application as it's running in a production like environment or production environment. So for today, we're going to be focusing on though just the container aspect of it. Okay, so but keep in mind all those types of services or um, tooling technology that you might be relying upon. Keep that in mind throughout this as well, because there might be things within it that you need to be taking into consideration regarding the security of the overall security posture of your application and your projects and your services. All right, so when it comes to containers, Snyk can also help you out there. There's this product called Snyk Container that will actively monitor your Dockerfile and what's defined in there as your dependencies, if you will, for running your container of running your application inside of a container. So that's where this blank line comes into play. And again, this UI that you're seeing is Snyk's website, the Snyk app. So app.snyk.io. So yeah, so this is, and it's drilled into this particular project, the Goof project that we're going to be diving into in the demo portion of the Stranger Danger today. So in this case, the Docker file is alerting us to that we have 216 high vulnerabilities, 187 medium, and 452 low. So let's dive into an example Docker file that defines the container that we need to support and run our node application. So some things to consider here and ask yourself, does the base image that we're relying upon have vulnerabilities in it? In this case, we're using the base image of node that could be pulling in all kinds of things that are kind of layered into that base image that we need insight into to understand if there's any vulnerabilities being introduced via that. Maybe you didn't know this, but there's quite a bit of vulnerabilities that can be found in official container images. Referring back to the same study, the study can be found, by the way, at snyk.io/open source security, open hyphen source hyphen security. Um, that study found, at least from 2018 and 2019, this one right here, by the way, is Node, the official Node base image, had 642 vulnerabilities that were disclosed for the Node base image, right? And as you can see, all of them throughout the different various ecosystems and technologies here have at least some number of vulnerabilities in it. And unless you get all the way down to more closer to bare metal, kind of, if you will, type of image like Ubuntu. Right. So now you're thinking, okay, what about the vulnerabilities there? But there's still more. Wait, there's more. What about any common software that you might be pulling in and you're relying upon? Maybe you need to do some image cropping, image manipulation, image processing, you want to have something that'll help you do that. Well, in this case, for this example application, it's pulling in a common software called Image Magic that's helping provide that functionality to us. So we don't have to write it ourselves in our own code. We can just let the underlying application or binary handle that for us. And we pull that in through an apt-get in this operating system. Are there any vulnerabilities potentially found in that version of that tooling that we're relying upon? Then we have our, the typical what we talked about in the layer above, which was our open source dependencies that are directly or indirectly having potential vulnerabilities in it. And last but not least, what about the version of the runtime that you are using for your programming language? In this case, Node. Is the version of Node that's pulled in for that official base image, just plain old Node without specifying a version there? What version is getting pulled in? And is that vulnerable? Does it have known vulnerabilities in it that are leaving us susceptible in our apps that are running in production? So you get the idea that in a similar way, where you need to worry about our open source dependencies, we need to worry about all the dependencies that we're relying upon within our container images. So let's jump into the demo portion now. We're going to start hacking a Node app. And to give you an idea, we'll see what we can get through given time. But the typical approach that I go through here is we'll see a vulnerability in an open source library and exploit that and fix it. And then we'll do our best to, time permitting again, show an example of how having a vulnerability in some common software within our container definition or Dockerfile can introduce a vulnerability to us. And last but not least, a vulnerability found in the Node runtime. All right, that was not fun. We didn't get to it yet. So opening up VS Code, my favorite code editor, we're going to jump right into things. So let's get quickly acquainted with the Node application here. Okay. If you've been here before, you've probably seen this, but maybe if you have questions since the last time, then feel free to pop them in as well. Surly Dev, I see you in the chat saying Snyk is running locally in a container. No, it is not. It's Snyk in terms of the container aspect of it. Snyk is, oops, that's not the right button. Hey, I'm in space. Did not mean to do that. Pressing the wrong buttons. There I am. Okay. Snyk is, I don't know the specifics of it actually, but Snyk is not running in the container. Snyk is monitoring, it's analyzing the Docker file and then using that to tell it to do its own lookup on whether or not there are issues or vulnerabilities that are known based on what's defined in the Docker file. In a similar fashion to the way like Snyk will look at your package JSON to understand your open source dependencies. Nerds in space, yes. And yes, Surly Dev, wow, good job, Ubuntu. Although I don't know what the situation is with the latest version of Ubuntu. Keep in mind that study was 2018 it was up to 2019. So we have a couple years since then that we should see how things have trended in terms of official base images or container images and the vulnerabilities found in them. All right. So this application, it's one of the typical example applications. It's a to-do app. Okay. I have a Docker container running just to spin up a MongoDB database instance to store the to-do items for us. So that's what's running. That's the only thing I've done prior to starting this all. And I've already npm installed because we don't want to wait on that, right? So now I'm going to run npm start to get this app up and running. And then I can come back over to my browser here. And let's actually go localhost 2001. And this is our goof to-do app, okay? Really quickly getting acquainted with it, you can just type in anything. You can type in, like allow your end users, they want to keep reminders of like, you gotta brush your teeth. Actually, fun fact, this time, right before the stream chat, you'll be happy. I brushed my teeth. So now my breath smells way better if you're around me right now. Do you smell it? Does it smell good? But usually my typical example I would go with is like, hey, we wanted to provide to our end users the capabilities to make these to-do items that have a little bit more richer of an experience. They want to be able to stylize their to-do items. So maybe you really want to bold something to emphasize it. You can use the markdown syntax for that. And now it's bold. I really, really got to brush my teeth, right? And then I can delete things. I can edit things like, actually this one should be walk the dog and so forth, right? But in addition to that, since it's supporting Markdown, we're providing that functionality to our end users. They can also put in Markdown links. So Markdown syntax for links is square brackets for the link text, So let's say it's like Snyk, and the link is https://snyk.io, right? Now I can click on that and it brings me to the Snyk webpage. Cool stuff, right? So that is the app. How is that made possible? It's made possible because of a library called Marked. You may have seen before in our package JSON. Let's get that back open up here. We have Marked right here. And just ignore this. We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here, but there's some things indicating to me directly in my editor that I might have some issues with that. But before we get into the nitty gritty of it, let's switch gears. Let's switch perspectives, and let's take on the persona of an attacker. Right, and an attacker only has access to this portion. They're only seeing, at least at the onset of them, doing some reconnaissance on your applications right now. Floss? You want me to floss? Hold on. Like the dance, right? Did I do a good job? I'm not much of a dancer, it really does. All right. So an attacker is just seeing the client side things of your web app, right? Your website. And so they might notice all the capabilities that are here and they might think, okay, let's start iterating through possible malicious things we can enter into this input field to see where we can get with it, right? So the first thing, since this is a browser and we know browsers support running JavaScript, let's see if we can inject some JavaScript into this input field and if it gets executed by the browser. So I entered that in a script using the script tags and the alert function, which should, we're hoping, generate a little pop-up using the browser's built-in alert capabilities to show a message that has just the text of one. So I entered that in and not a whole lot happened for me, not what I was hoping for. I was hoping to see an alert box, but instead I can see that it handled my input that I provided in a way to where it expects, or it's doing its best, right, to prepare and understand when somebody is trying to do something malicious and then handling it accordingly. In this case, I believe my understanding is it's doing some input escaping. And what does that mean? That means it's knowing that we're using this data within the context of HTML, we can encode the data such that HTML, it'll be rendered as HTML and not rendered as actual code that would run in the browser. So in this case, maybe it might be keying off of the little angle brackets there, maybe the parentheses as well, but it's escaping it and rendering it directly out. So, all right, well, we might feel like, all right, that's enough. We can't get any further as an attacker, but attackers don't usually give up that easily. They're going to try and take it a step further. They'll notice that they can use Markdown in here. Uh, what are the stars for? A fit nerd and surly dev. Fit nerd, you should be able to, since you're a mod, you should be able to drop a link if that's what you're trying to do. Surly Dev says, I think the fact that it has goof above your head while you attempt to floss just looks so delicious. Thanks. Yeah. Clip it and ship it. You set me up for that one, Surly Dev. You posted a clip you just made? Oh, okay. All right. We'll check it out just maybe towards the end of the session. Thank you for that. Great. Wonderful. All right. So an attacker's not going to stop there. They're going to notice, okay, you do Markdown, and they might be familiar with Markdown and that you can enter in links. So they're going to be like, okay, let's test some things out with the links. And instead of doing, the protocol of HTTPS or HTTP for a link, what if we go with JavaScript, which is valid to put into a link here, and we try to alert that way, run the alert function that way. Let's see what happens. Maybe it'll trigger it, maybe it won't. So now I see, hey, it didn't trigger anything, but I'm getting a different result. So the logic must be different here that's handling that type of malicious input where it's sanitizing now. In this case, it's ripping out and removing some of the data, at least from being rendered on the screen. When I click on it, it still seems to be keeping it intact, at least there as the data. But in terms of rendering it, actually, even more so, you see how the to-do changes? I didn't notice that before. That might be a bug in itself. So in any case, an attacker, I'm noticing this, right? And I start iterating this on further, and further to see how deep I can get into the logic and understanding the logic that's trying to protect this input and handle the input that's happening here. But to save us some time, we already have how we can go about handling this or exploiting this vulnerability that I know is possible here. And in fact, actually, you all can go to github.com and look at the Snyk Labs organization, Snyk-Labs, and you can pull down this repo and start toying with it and explore all the other vulnerabilities and exploits that are possible within this project that's intentionally vulnerable. Okay. So I'm going to paste this in here and let's step through what exactly is happening. Okay. So we have the link text, obviously, right? And then we're still using this JavaScript protocol, if you will. But instead, we might be thinking, okay, the logic here, let's test the logic behind the things. Is it keying, just like how it's keying off of maybe the angle bracket here to not allow this script to be executed? Maybe it's keying off of JavaScript colon. And in case of that, let's use the encoded version of the colon character to try and trick it, right? That was like the first thing to check here. But we'll notice, in fact, let me remove this and enter that in there so you can see. That gives us a different result. And now I can't even click on it. The data is getting completely removed. Okay. So in the case where it does indeed work, we see we're getting further with that, right? Now maybe we think the logic is keying off of JavaScript colon, whether it's the actual colon character or the encoded version of it. But in order to break out of that logic that might be protecting this input, we can add in some more valid JavaScript that does nothing, but no longer fulfills the condition that is checking for this malicious input. I'll explain a bit further if you're not following from there. But in any case, I'm putting in this. This is a valid keyword in JavaScript. You could also put in something other like window, or maybe another one is document, whatever, what have you, and it won't alter it won't break anything in the sense of like what I'm trying to do as an attacker here. It will just allow me to provide valid JavaScript that will break out of the logic that is preventing my JavaScript code from actually executing. So if I hit enter now, well, that didn't quite work, I guess. But if I do this and I hit enter, none of it's working. And you know why that is, folks? That is because I didn't reset my demo prior to doing this session today and have already implemented and installed the fixed version of things. So this totally backfires on me and I completely messed up. But we're going to graciously just back out of this. We're going to RMRF node modules real quick. Boom, bada bing. We're going to make sure we get back to, although it says it's vulnerable, right? I must have just not actually updated it. So let's npm install the current versions of things and just twiddle our thumbs a little bit. How are you all doing today? How do you feel when you see a presenter mess up? You tried to drop a script tag in and Twitch filtered it. Oh wow, that's interesting. A fit nerd. Ergo Rod says no worries, thanks and welcome in. Happy to have you here. Ergon Rod. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Welcome in. Happy to have you here. And we'll get this squared away in just a moment. Don't worry. That way you can see this in action. So what I believe happened here is I had already updated to the fixed version of the library that we are trying to take advantage of a vulnerability in. And therefore, it's not rendering the malicious code anymore as a result of that. So oopsie daisy, that's what's happening here. That's why it's just showing like a blank item. All right, so hopefully I think it might be 0.34 is what I need. Is npm install. Ooh, Bon. I was off the home row. Npm install marked. Oh, see, it's at 0.36. What the heck? All right, let's just run with it like that and see. I'm blanking here. I'm blanking on this. All right. If we refresh, no, I got to start it. npm start. Bam. Here we go. We're up and running again, and we go back to the browser. If we refresh, there we go. Okay. See, this is what I was expecting to happen on both of those cases. I should have known it when we did the first one because I knew this did work. So if you do whether it's this or it's document, like I was thinking that wasn't working, or window, the reason it wasn't working is because I had the patch version. So I can do it like this. So now you see the difference here, right? Gotcha link is actually rendering, going back to the input we put in before. And if I click it, bam, it opens up an alert box. We see the message of just one because that's all I entered in there, but I can make it anything else I want it to be. And that, as from an attacker's perspective, is like is gold, right? That is the first step into breaking into the functionality of the application and being able to inject my own code into it. Now you might be thinking, Brian, wow, big deal. You're making an alert box pop up in your own browser on your own machine. Big whoop. Who cares, right? Forget about it. Well, yeah, you have a point. That's fair. However, attackers like this is just the beginning of it. This is just scratching the surface. And attackers can take this further and they could start running other JavaScript code in here that could maybe look for, I don't know, sensitive information. So maybe access tokens that are stored in session storage or local storage. Maybe they can start accessing cookies that are important for showing who's been authenticated and logged in already and start pulling that and sending it to themselves via XHR requests or, making API calls, sending that data over to their own API and start exfiltrating that sensitive data. That's just one possibility. Again, though, you might be thinking, big deal. You're going to run that against your own machine and you're just going to be logged in as you're just going to get your own sensitive information. You have a good point, but then that's where things start iterating even further. An attacker will trick other people that they know like, that there's probably a reason they're targeting this application as an example. They're probably not targeting the goof application because it's a demo here, but let's say it's your application. They might be targeting it because they know a certain person that they want to attack or victim that they're looking to apply this attack to uses this application. They found this vulnerability in it and then will therefore try to trick them into executing this JavaScript code without them even knowing it. So in this case, I'm blatantly executing it and making it known so that I know it's possible as an attacker, but I would make it even more, like quietly, I can't think of the word right now, but I would make it more quiet to where it's unknown to the end user, the person I'm attacking or people that I'm attacking. Another thing is like keep in mind, like I'm running this and these to do items are being stored in a database. So maybe this is like a profile and I can get people to browse my profile. And as soon as they open up my profile, it loads up the data that's tied into my bio, let's say, and then starts pulling that automatically behind the scenes, sending and exfiltrating the sensitive information for anybody that browses to my profile. Hopefully that helps drive the message home and you get the idea that it's not, it is more of a big deal than it is perceived to be based on what we're seeing right now. So why is this possible? Well, because of my mistake, you already probably know. The reason it's possible is because of this library right here. Mark is an open source library that I've pulled into the application that allows me to provide that functionality of using markdown syntax in the to-do items. And what's even in that particular version, there is a security setting. I did my due diligence as a developer and I was like, you know what? Let me see if there's any. I mean, ideally, you want this stuff to be on by default. But that's not always the case in open source. But at least they have the option to turn it on, and I found that, and I set sanitization to true. We talked about sanitization. It's checking for malicious input and removing it out of the input there. However, even with that on, this vulnerability is possible. So, how am I going to know about this? How am I going to realize that I have this vulnerability in my application due to this open source dependency that I'm relying upon? That is where Snyk comes into play. In fact, what you may have caught before and what's showing up here is I'm using the Snyk extension for VS Code. There's a Snyk plugin or extension for other uh, integrated development environments, IDEs, that you might be out using for your programming languages and ecosystems, whether it's JavaScript or Java or .NET. There's likely, I believe, I just focus on JavaScript, but I know for sure there's Java because I've seen a Fit Nerd demo this as well in like Eclipse that you can use the Snyk extension there to help provide these types of similar capabilities. So what's happening here is the Snyk extension that I have installed, one, it has this view like above my head here that analyzes my package lock JSON and lets me know of vulnerabilities that are introduced through my dependencies all through here. I can click on them. In fact, let's go to the marked one. It's alphabetical order, and I'm thinking that's the one. I think, nope, this one. Nope, this one. Nope, this one. I don't know. Anyway, the idea here, or what I really want to show you or demonstrate, is that when I click on one, it gives me essentially the same details that you would get in the app, the UI, the website for Snyk when you've added projects to your Snyk account up on the website. It gives me a rundown of the vulnerability that was found, why it's vulnerable, where it's being introduced. It's through this dependency, how I can remediate the vulnerability. I just need to upgrade to version 3.9 of Marked Library, but I can learn. And this is the thing that I really want to emphasize here for folks is as a developer, like, yes, it's great to just quickly fix things and all that, but, like, if you're really interested, the information is here to help you learn why these things are possible. Learn about different types of vulnerabilities that could be possible in your applications and how they are, exploited to an attacker's advantage. So you can read up about that, and that's what I love about the Snyk write-up that they do, um, so that I can educate myself and understand more about the maybe there's new security vulnerabilities to be thinking about as well that have been discovered over time, right? And I can learn about that I didn't know about through this information's provided to me. So there's that, and then there's also, like, showing you some of the references to down at the bottom of, like, the PR that introduces the fix for it and disclosure of it and the commits and so forth, right? So, yeah, I think that's really helpful right in my editor of choice so that I don't have to leave it and I can fix it before I even push it and commit it to my, my branches that I might be using in my source control management system. So in addition to that, the extension, you don't have to necessarily be looking in here because I'm not always looking at that view. What's nice is right in my package JSON, as I'm browsing through here, you can see the squiggly lines, which a lot of us are used to seeing nowadays, right? To indicate something's up, right? Something's wrong. So here it's telling me that that version of marked introduces 10 vulnerabilities into my application, and I can click the little light bulb to see and understand more and that, you know what I mean? So instead of me having necessarily be in the sneak view of the extension, I can be in my code and be alerted to the problems that are coming up from a security perspective without having to do that. Staying within the context. Context switching, we all, I think, know. If you don't, maybe you haven't noticed yet, but when you do a lot of context switching, it definitely hinders your efficiency and productivity. So being able to stay within the same context without having to jump around too much is super helpful. So what I would need to do here is, and let's do this since we're getting really close on time. I need to upgrade to this version or 0.36, I believe. I do that, or I just manually install it here, npm install marked at 0.36, and then I'll restart my app. We'll see that it does indeed fix the issue that we were seeing, the vulnerability. It patches the vulnerability that we were exploiting as an attacker. So npm start, and we'll go back to the browser. We'll refresh, and notice how I didn't change anything with the data, but now the way it handles that input is it just doesn't render or show anything on the screen anymore, which is what we saw when I first did this. But now if I try to enter in a new one, we'll see again, it just comes up as empty. Let's delete some of these to like further make sure you believe me on that. Okay, new one right there. It's empty. That's how we can find and fix vulnerabilities in our open source dependencies using Snyk open source. All right, we are right at time of when we need to end things, so we're gonna unfortunately skip the demos that are we can do maybe in a future stream where I go into some of the container side of things with this. So instead, we're gonna jump back to the presentation and close things out a little bit. So yeah, that was fun. What can you do about it, right? The biggest thing is, well, this is going into the container stuff, but the biggest thing is you can go about connecting your source code repositories, and making sure that they are continuously scanned. You need something, whether that's Snyk or something else. You need something that can do that for you, so you're not having to do it manually. Because if you're doing it manually, odds are you're going to miss something. It's going to be more likely you miss something, you miss a vulnerability in one of your packages and so forth, and you're going to be left vulnerable to an attack through that vulnerability. So you need some type of tooling to help automate and manage that for you, your dependencies and those child dependencies of that all the way down the tree to alert you of vulnerabilities that have been disclosed in that open source and inform you about how you can go about patching those things if there's even a patch available, right? So the other thing that we would have gotten through with the container stuff, but the idea is you want to do this very similar to open source. You want to connect your container image registries to some type of tool like Snyk. In this case, it would be Snyk Container that would actively monitor your images that you're using and alert you of vulnerabilities that are within them. But the thing is, it's a little bit more difficult to get to like a whole net zero across the board on vulnerabilities than it is for your open source dependencies when it comes to container images. And so because of that, this is the other takeaway that we usually try to convey as part of this presentation, and that is you need to prefer and lean on more minimal base images, as small and as slim as possible, and really kind of layer in the things yourself more manually in your definition of your container that you're building out. referring back to that Dockerfile we were talking about before, don't get a big hunky chunky, that's a technical term, hunky chunky base image to work from. Start out as small as possible and then slowly layer in the things that you need yourself so you can have a little bit more fine-grained control on the versions that you're using of like your runtime, the versions you're using of common software running underneath the application that you need, and so forth. And that will give you the that'll set you up for more success to limit the vulnerabilities that are found and introduced through this technology. With that said, closing things out here, I hope you all stay safe. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them to me, or you can reach out to me on Twitter, twitter.com/_ClarkIO. A lot of the stuff that we covered here, you can learn and read up on using the Snyk blog. So if you go to snyk.io/blog, it's a great resource. I mean, myself included, I go to it quite often, at least on a weekly basis, and I learn ton of stuff from the amazing security researchers and folks alike within Snyk that are writing up a lot of the cool. One of the most recent ones, actually, I'm just going to go off the script again. I mean, that's the nature of live streams, right? But one of the more recent ones was from a colleague of ours, Aviad, who's a security researcher at Snyk. Found we had a live stream about this too. You can check out the recording of that. But that one was such a great read to see. It's quite the story. Basically, the Aviad had found a malicious package in the wild in npm, and there's quite a funny ending to that, basically. So I encourage you all to go search for that on the Snyk blog, and I think you might find that a great read if you got some time. Nafron, thank you. I need to try that, says Nafron. I appreciate that, Nafron. Thank you for tuning in, buddy. Good to see you. Surly Dev, thank you as well. Have a great afternoon yourself. The Fit Nerd, thank you for the telling me a nice recovery from the demo monster. And Surly Dev, Ergenrod, thank you for saying awesome there. Surly Dev says, I like when presenters slip up and make errors. Makes me realize they make the same kind of errors I do. If I didn't want to see that kind of thing, I would watch YouTube or Pluralsight video. Yes, that makes total sense. Right. That's the nature of live streams. That's the idea here. And why I tend to love them so much is you don't see the happy path all the time, which is what you see in the scripted content, which is out there. That stuff is definitely good, and there is absolutely a place. They still bring a ton of value. But a lot of times, as a viewer of those types of tutorials and learning videos that are out there, they don't necessarily account for some of the hurdles you might run into when you're trying to follow along. And that's where I think live streams really come into play. So appreciate you bringing that up, Surly Dev. I completely agree. What's the title of that blog post? Let me see if I can find it, actually. Hold on just a second. Let me switch back here. Close this out. And go to snyk.io/blog. It's fairly recent. I'll get the direct link to drop in the chat, though, really quick. I don't think I have a meeting right now, so I should be able to go a little bit longer than planned. It is called Targeted. I think this is it. Targeted NPM dependency confusion attack caught red-handed. So it's really, really interesting. Quite the ending of it. Like that's why I really feel like it's a story arc, because they find this vulnerable this malicious package out in the wild that's going to try and trick somebody to install it, and then and they think it's something that's really bad that's going on, and they're feeling good that they caught something, which they did. They did catch something, right? The security research team, they did catch something, but it turned out to be something that they weren't expecting. I'm going to leave the ending for you to read because it's interesting. So there's the link in the chat. Here it is up on the screen as well. And yes, highly recommend that. That was one of the more recent ones that I read that I found super interesting and helpful. So, all right, folks. Happy to see you here. Glad to have you all tuning in. Glad you're intrigued, Surly Dev. And we'll be seeing you. The next live stream we have coming up is tomorrow, I believe, here on the Snyk Live channel. Right back here, starting at 9 a.m. Eastern time, we have, and this one's going to be interesting because it's something that I'm not as familiar with. I've shared this. I'm familiar with Snyk open source. I'm familiar with Snyk containers and Snyk code. Snyk code is the one that you kind of saw a little bit of it in my demo through the squigglies through the extension. But Snyk code analyzes your code to see if there's any vulnerabilities in it. That's the third product. But the fourth product that Snyk offers is Snyk IAC, or infrastructure as code, where it analyzes your I believe. I'm not an expert in this, but like your YAML files to see if you're introducing anything into your infrastructure that's supporting your applications and your projects and services, if you're introducing any vulnerabilities to the infrastructure definition. So just like how you take a Docker file to define your containers, you are using something like YAML to define your infrastructure, and there's things you depend upon within your infrastructure that you might be introducing vulnerabilities with, right? So, um, I forget who's running this. Maybe a Fit Nerd remembers, but I know I'm pretty sure Matt Jarvis and Brian Vermeer, two colleagues of ours, will be running the user office hours that is tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern, right here on the Snyk Live channel, twitch.tv/Snyk Live, or if you're watching on YouTube, youtube.com/SnykSec, Snyk, SEC. You'll be able to watch it live, and it'll be recorded in case you missed it. I'm going to try to tune into that, but I got yet another meeting that's overlapping with that, so we'll see. In any case, check it out. Hey, Detox, good to see you. Welcome in. We're just ending the stream though, so hopefully we'll see you again next time. We have a stream tomorrow. If you want to be able to get notified or know of when this channel is streaming, be sure to drop a follow if you're on Twitch, and if you're on YouTube, subscribe, like and subscribe like a real YouTuber. Can I buy zero-click iPhone bug for under 5 million? I have no idea, Detox. Sorry. That's not something I'm knowledgeable in. All right, folks. Until next time, I hope you have a good rest of your day wherever you are in the world. Thank you for tuning in, and see you again next time. Bye-bye now. Peace out. See ya.